All right, welcome to chapter 16, the appraisal chapter. Appraisal is a distinct specialization. People go to school to become an appraiser. They are licensed by the state, and every state has its own appraising authority, and they also have a national, just much like the realtors have a state and a national society as well. Remember, we're going to talk today about fundamental methodology of how appraisers work. This is the one group of guys you won't see a lot. They do not want you to have interaction with the appraisal to make sure that there's no questionable things. They certainly don't want you to call the appraiser and go, hey, I got an extra pair of Colts tickets if this house appraises. All right? So in order to keep from that happening, we don't interact with an appraisal at all. The only thing we do is we get a phone call and the appraiser goes, hey, I'm going in Monday, what's the combo? Okay? Now, there's a lot of new theories going on. A buddy of mine's an appraiser, and he's actually speaking right now, and one of the questions he's going to answer is, you can talk to an appraiser before they submit paperwork. All right? So if you think your house is special in any way, you probably want to capture all of that and put it somewhere where the appraiser can see when he goes in the house. All right? If you've added on or finished the basement or you've added on something, you might want to capture that. But once the guy submits the appraiser to the bank, there ain't no going back. And there's a lot of reasons why that is. One is if someone changes their number, then you question that person. Well, why did you change the number? Are you trying to cheat us? Other reasons why, if I change the number, then it makes it look like I don't know what I'm doing, and a bank may not hire me anymore. So there's a lot of reasons that it will not get altered once it starts.
Does the appraiser look if the house was previously a 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath, now it's a 3-bedroom, 2 bath?
Yeah, he will take all that into consideration. Hopefully your tax record reflects the change. Because, see, theoretically what you guys are supposed to do when you add a bathroom is you pull a permit, so then the state authority knows, hey, you're not a 2-bedroom, 1 bath anymore, now you're a 2-bedroom, 2 bath, and we can tax you higher. There are a lot of people that go, well, I didn't pull a permit, I just popped up over the weekend. How do I give you credit for that? The tax record's wrong. So that's what I said. If you're making any kind of changes like that, make sure that they understand it. We're going to talk about the concept, and we're going to talk about 3 approaches to value. If you guys like math, today's a math day. Woohoo! All right, you ready? Here we go. On page 290. An extra calculator. I could give you my phone, but I don't want you to see my pictures.
That's okay. Here, you can use my calculator. I have none. Okay.
Everybody's, use my calculator. Yeah, use mine. Sorry, I don't have a calculator. You left your phone at home. That's like a cardinal sin, isn't it? That's almost become like that's the equivalent for a man to a woman's purse. And I've done that before. I've walked out of a place, and before I even get to the car, like, crap, left my phone. So you got to go back, because that's the first thing I always check on. All right, an appraisal is an opinion of a value supported by facts and an approved methodology. So it is an opinion, but it's the opinion of a very educated person. It is also supposed to be an unbiased opinion. That's what I was saying earlier. That's why they don't want you interacting with these appraisers, because they want it to be unbiased. After all, who does the appraiser truly work for? The bank. You guys need to keep that in mind. I get that all the time. People call me and go, well, the buyer's appraiser did so-and-so. I'm like, well, first of all, he's not there to protect the buyer. The appraiser is there to protect the bank. And if you think back, we blew through it kind of quickly, but I'll just remind you, remember when a bank loans money to a person, they sign a mortgage which collateralizes this property. How does the bank know that property is actually $100,000 or that value? That's where the appraiser comes in. So the bank calls the appraiser and says, hey, Raymond's offering up this property at 12 Smith Street as collateral for the $100,000 loan. We want you to go out and tell us what that house is worth. That's the appraiser's job. He comes back and says, yes, I've used my approved methodology, I've done the math, all of that. It's worth about 120 grand. The bank says, okay, we'll make the loan. So the bank is the appraiser's client. Now, under the new Dodd-Frank law and the truth in lending, it's illegal to coerce an appraiser, all right? So there is a violation there. When I was in the corporate world, one of my specialties was EPA rules and regs and OSHA rules and regs. It's actually an OSHA violation to kill an OSHA inspector. Well, you know, you can beat the murder rap, but you're going to get fined $500 for it. All right? Yeah, that's actually an OSHA law. You can't kill an inspector. There were a lot of times I thought about it, but so there are rules in the Dodd-Frank that prohibit the coercion of influencing an appraisal. You can't do that.
So don't leave milk and cookies out like Santa.
Yeah, don't leave milk and cookies out and all that. The appraisal report is an opinion of market value that is detailing the property, and it's given. And there are several different types of appraisal reports. Today we're going to talk about what's called the 1004. That's the big one, and I'll show it to you here in a second. And an appraiser is an independent professional. A lot of times the appraisers are seen as the most intelligent one because they do all the math. So a lot of times in our real estate world, we think of them as being the smart ones. But I ask you this question. They go to school for 90 hours to become a trainee, and they go and they have to work 2,000 hours and to move up. They get paid about $400 for an appraisal. We go to school 90 hours and we make about $3,000 on a commission. Who's smarter? So think about that. An appraiser has to work almost 10 times as much as we do to kind of make the same money, basically. Not that I'm picking on appraisers or anything like that. Title 11 of the FIREA Act, right there in your paragraph, the Financial Institution Reform, Recovery and Enforcement Act, requires that there is any federal transaction backed by money must be licensed, a competent licensed person. There are laws that's going to throw you guys out here. Down in that next to bottom paragraph, appraisals of residential property valued at $250,000 or less are exempt and need not be performed by a licensed appraiser. That's the federal law. Every bank has an overlay, and they're going to require it of every loan. So while FIREA, the federal law says, yeah, if the house is under $250,000, you don't need a licensed appraiser. Most lenders will say, no, we're still having a licensed appraiser do everything. So there's virtually no cases of loans secured by a bank that they do not use a licensed appraiser. Can I, as a broker, do an appraisal? The answer is I most certainly can. I just cannot do one that involves a loan backed by a federal institution. So if it was a cash deal, I could appraise the property if both people buy off on it. I've done two in my career where they were for insurance purposes, where the guy wanted to buy an insurance policy and didn't know how much his property was worth, so he hired me to truly appraise the property. And he took that value and said, okay, this is what my property's worth, this is how much insurance I want. So as a broker, you can appraise property, just not for loans backed by federal institutions. All right? If you do, you still must follow what they call USPAP, the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. This is the methodology that they use. And we use the same methodology so every appraiser gets the same answer, theoretically. All right? There is a pattern to which they do the appraisal. If they follow that pattern correctly, they all should come out within a couple dollars of being the same thing. And they do that so that banks are protected throughout the country if they hire an appraiser in Los Angeles or in Florida. Okay? There are many different organizations, and there's a list of them there in the book. Once again, there's not many. There's no question that's going to say, name 3 organizations for appraisers or anything like that. Just realize that there's all kinds of different organizations that they can belong to. Now, as a realtor, a lot of the things you guys do, so let's step back for a second. Appraiser will give a value of the property. While it's his opinion, most banks act like it's handed down from the burning bush. All right? It technically is his opinion of value. As a realtor, what do? We do this thing called a CMA, which stands for Comparative Market Analysis. Or if you're real hip into the slang, it's called comps. We've talked about this, and now we're going to touch on it. A realtor will pull the comps. Can you pull the comps for me? Well, I pulled the comps, and this is what you got. All right? So it's a competitive market analysis. The big difference between what we do and what an appraiser does is what we do, it comes up with a range of values. That's the single biggest difference. An appraiser is going to go in, he's going to work his black magic, which we're going to talk about, roll the chicken bones and do all that kind of stuff. He's going to come to the bank and say, that house is worth 128.5. We pull the comps for our seller. You better come back with, well, it's somewhere between 126 and 131. You cannot give a value to your seller. If you do, that's called a appraisal, and you guys are not licensed appraisers. All right? So the biggest difference is when we pull the comps, you come up with a range of values. And typically we used sold comps is the most preferred. Sold means it actually is already completed and people were willing to pay for it. Some people use currently properties on the market. Those are called listings. Sometimes you might use a pending. Pending's close to being sold, but it hadn't really fulfilled its purpose yet. And, there are other things that people use. I've seen them use expireds. Solds are the best answer. All right? And I'll tell you why here in just a second. You'll see it. The big thing to remember, a comp is not a CMA. I mean, that made everybody look up. A comp is not an appraisal. Thank you very much, whoever said that. All right, a comp is not an appraisal. Now, on the top of the next page there at 292, there's a relatively new animal that has come on the market. In the 2007 timeframe, this thing started popping up where all these people started going into foreclosures and having problems, and banks, in their infinite wisdom, and I guess I could understand being a business owner, did not want to pay $400 for an appraisal on all the properties that went into trouble. They created this thing called a broker's price opinion. We call it a BPO. A BPO is kind of a hybrid between these. They would actually hire a broker. At that time, brokers were the elevated level. There were salespersons and brokers. So they would hire someone with experience, and they would have them do the comps, and then at the very end of the comps, they would ask for, okay, in your opinion, what's the value? And you could get paid on comps. We used to get paid anywhere from $45 to $75 per comp, all right? And that was the bank's way of trying to get this very watered down, what I would call a watered down appraisal, without having to engage a full appraisal and pay the $400 and all that. At one point in time, our office was doing anywhere from 50 to 80 of these a week. I mean, this was big business in 2010, 2011. We had an agent that made her living on doing nothing but BPOs. You know, she was making $1,200 to $1,300 a week just doing this stuff for the bank. Never listed, never had buyers, nothing. Just did BPOs. That's all she did. So it's the new version, and they still do it. Now they've kind of altered it a little bit. Now they're like, you do a BPO, and if it goes to a listing, we'll give you the listing. Or at least they promise that. Then there were a lot of BPOs that companies that came on the market and hired a bunch of agents real quick and did a couple thousand for the bank and never paid agents. I mean, I knew agents that were owed, you know, $300 and $400 by companies that you'd call their phone number and it was disconnected. So there's all kinds of scams. The good thing about a BPO is for you beginning people, it gave you a little bit of money out of the gate. So if you weren't working, you could make a couple $100 a week. Plus it gave you access to a neighborhood so that you could get used to seeing in a certain neighborhood. Plus it also allowed you to learn to work with the MLS system in general. They're still out there, and if you Google BPO company or BPO, I can't remember the word now, asset manager, you can get on the list and put your name on the list. Once you got to have your license. Oh, it's going to roll all the way under there. No, you got to have your broker's license. They make you pass another test? I haven't had that yet. I haven't seen that yet. They're making the barrier of entry higher to pay you less? Probably. Yeah. What was your question?
That just, you know, after watching those two movies, getting a watered down version of Appraisal just seems like it would be, it could be dangerous, yeah.
Well, what these were used for were people that were called in, and remember we talked about the short sale? And the short sale is where the bank takes 90 for the house that they loaned 100 on. Well, how do you know the house is only worth 90? Yeah. So this is actually shutting the barn door after the horse is already gone. They've already made the loan. The guy's in trouble. The guy calls in and says, I want to short sell my house. I've got a buyer at 90. The bank says, you owe me 100. And they're like, well, sorry, I'm out of work and my house has lost value. The bank says, well, how do I know the house has lost value? You're in Indiana. I'm in California. So what they would do, they had so many hundreds of thousands of these, they couldn't hire an appraiser. The cost would be too prohibitive. So like I said, they would call CAT, and what they did is there was a company out there that would just issue her 20 at a time. Here's 20 houses. We want you to go by and give us your opinion of the value of this house. Banks would use CAT's value as, do we really want to chase this person for foreclosure? Has it really lost value? Because in the BPO, there's a whole bunch of questions like, are there boarded houses in the neighborhood? Is the market driven by REOs? Is there a lot of HUD homes? So they were trying to really assess the value of this short sale without really having to pay for a whole appraisal again. That was the whole purpose of what BPOs were doing. Like I said, they were being cheap, but I can understand, when you've got 400,000 or 500,000 of these throughout the country, you can't afford to pay $400. You'd pay $40. All right? And Kat would get 20 or 30 at a time from one company, and what she'd do is she'd spend all day just driving these 20 and taking pictures, and then spend the next day in the office just filling out paperwork, and then they'd mail her a check. All right? Let's go to the next audio file.